Have you ever wondered why some people at work just seem so good at responding to questions, especially difficult questions, that you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I don't know how I would have responded to that, but they handled it so gracefully and with such skill? If that's you, then you're in the right place. Today, I want to talk about a very interesting and relevant topic, which is how do you respond effectively when asked questions on the spot that you're not prepared for? And I'm going to share with you in a video that's less than 20 minutes my exact response framework that I've taken years of working in investment banking, management consulting, and in big tech to learn and to gather together. And I'm just going to give it all to you in a very short video today. So if you're still with me, make sure you lock in, full screen the video, turn off your notifications, and follow along. So I want to start with an analogy. So effective communication and being able to articulate your thoughts is like flying a plane. So I want you to imagine that if you and your mind is the pilot of this airplane, you are trying to land this plane. So you are approaching a runway, and being able to successfully land with all your passengers safe inside and no issues, smooth landing, no bumps or anything like that. That is what it looks like when you effectively respond to a question and the listener understands exactly what you're saying. And so whatever you intended to say, they receive that message perfectly and the plane lands smoothly. But in 9 times out of 10, that is not actually what happens. And even though in your mind, you might have a really clear idea of, hey, I have this idea or this concept that I really want to explain to this person, I understand it well in my own head, they don't understand what you're talking about, or they only understand part of it and they have to ask a bunch of follow-up questions. And the reason is because there's a lot of different things that can inhibit you from landing the plane smoothly. Just think about how when you're landing a plane, there could be bad weather conditions. Maybe there's a lot of wind, or maybe there's a bird flock that flies in front of you at the last minute. And maybe the weather is really cold, and so the runway is really icy that day. There's a lot of different things that can happen. And in that same way, when you're communicating, there's a lot of different things that can cloud the way that you deliver your message. For example, if you are really nervous and you're feeling a lot of pressure, then you might not be able to think clearly enough to actually articulate a understandable message. Or even if you have clearly thought through it in your mind, like I was mentioning earlier, you're not able to articulate it effectively because maybe you don't actually understand the concept as well as you think you do. Or maybe you don't know what the right words to deliver the message are. Or maybe you don't understand the level of context that your listener actually has, and maybe you're assuming far too much context or you're assuming far too little context. And so today I want to talk about, though, a very specific case, which is when you get asked a question that you don't know the answer to, or maybe you're asked the question on the fly, and in that moment you're kind of struggling to come up with an answer. And just like how landing a plane typically means that you only have maybe 60 seconds as you approach that runway at a high speed to land the plane, you don't have all day to just sit around and plan out exactly how you're going to say the message or how you're going to respond. And you don't have all day to just sit around before you have to land that plane. And so how do we approach situations where we are posed with a question that even if we prepared really well before, we don't know the answer to this one because maybe we didn't anticipate it, or maybe it caught us off guard? How do we respond without sounding unintelligent or like we're not an expert in that topic? And more importantly, how do we ensure that we don't lose credibility with whoever our audience is, whether it's our friends or our family, or it's our bosses or coworkers, or another company if you're interviewing for a job elsewhere, for example. So I want to first start by talking about the wrong ways to respond, and then we can move into what you should do instead. One of the most common things that we do as people is when we get nervous and when there's silence and we've just been posed a question, we want to fill that silence with a lot of words. And so what do? Well, we start saying stuff and we keep talking. And basically, we end up rambling. Rambling is when you're just talking on and on and on. And when you don't see that the other person is reacting or responding, you continue to talk because you think, oh, they must just want me to keep going, right? And also, it feels really awkward and I'm really nervous. And so I'm just going to keep talking and fill the silence and hopefully like somehow that makes things better. But the problem is, if you don't know what you actually want to say, then rambling isn't going to get you anywhere. But that is not even as bad as the second thing, which is deliberately saying stuff that you don't actually understand in an attempt to appear smart or appear like you actually know something about the thing that you're not actually an expert on or that you are struggling to answer. Now, that is really bad because if you try to BS whoever you're talking to, maybe it'll work if they don't really know what you're talking about. But in most cases, they're going to be more knowledgeable, potentially. Say, for example, you're interviewing for a job at a company and you're trying to BS your way around talking about why you like their company. And the thing is, this person knows the company that they work at better than you in almost every single way. And so if they even sniff out a hint of, BSing in your response, then you're instantly going to just get dinged from that interview. Full stop. So as someone also who has interviewed many candidates before and who speaks with a lot of students and a lot of early professionals, I can guarantee you the number one turnoff for me personally is when someone tries to talk about themselves or talk about a topic in a way that clearly demonstrates that they don't actually know that much, but they're attempting to appear smart in front of me. And this is just my personal perception, but I can tell you that it's not just me who feels this way. If you go into a conversation with someone more senior than you at work, or you go into a conversation with a coworker who knows more than you about that topic, or maybe you go into an interview, like I said, and people can tell that you're trying to say stuff that you don't actually understand that well and sound smart, that's gonna just put you not even at 0, it's gonna put you at -10, -100, because you've lost credibility before you've even said that much. Now, on the other hand though, say you recognize instantly that, okay, I don't really know the answer to this, or I'm struggling to think of the right answer right now. You don't want to go to the other end of the spectrum though, which is over apologizing or completely shutting down and being like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, like I don't know the answer, I'm so bad, like please don't look at me, I'm sorry, let me leave, let me walk out of the room. You do not want to do that. You don't want to over apologize. Recognize that it's okay to not know the answer to something, and do not over apologize or shut down, because even though that is probably better than trying to BS your way out of a question and get found out as someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, that still will lead to ultimately a loss of credibility. And that is exactly what we're trying to avoid here. So again, make sure you do not ramble. Be comfortable with the silence. I'm going to say this again because I've recently gotten off a number of calls where people rambled on and on and on because I am someone who likes to really listen and think about what someone is telling me. And so how that comes across is I think a lot of folks think that they need to keep talking because when they stop, I take a few seconds to respond because I'm processing what they're talking about and I'm thinking about, hey, what do I want to ask next? I'm not rushing into that next question. And if you don't consciously take steps to be comfortable with the silence in a conversation, then you're going to be very prone to rambling, especially when you're talking to someone that makes you nervous. And so it's really important to be comfortable with the silence because not only is that going to make you come across as more confident, because if you can actually end a sentence, people will respect that, but also it's going to stop you and make you slow down a little bit to actually think a little bit more about, okay, what do I want to say next, right? And let me open the floor to them, get some feedback, and actually see like what they think. But now let's talk about what you should actually do. And so this is the 4-step framework that I recommend to every early professional or intern that I talk to. And it starts with, first, if you feel your mind going blank and you don't immediately know what you want to talk about, you can use what's known as a mental reset phrase. So, for example, you've probably heard examples of this in your actual life or at work. It's when someone says, "Oh, that's a really good question," or "Oh, wow, I'm so glad that you brought that up. That actually reminds me of this." Phrases like that are called mental reset phrases because they basically give your brain time to think, and they don't require you to use a ton of mental or cognitive load, cognitive energy to say that phrase. And basically what's happening is kind of like a computer. While you're running this Surface program, the underlying CPU is able to start thinking about the actual question that was being asked. And so when you say stuff like, "Okay, that's a really good question. When I think about what you just said, that actually brings to mind this," you actually bought yourself like 2 or 3 seconds of time to actually think about what you want to say next. And that brings me to the second part though, which is you want to restate the question and ask clarifying questions, especially if you legitimately do not understand the question that was asked. For some people, I know if you get asked a question once, maybe you weren't really listening or you got caught off guard and maybe you were a little distracted and then you're like, "Oh shoot, my mind went completely blank. I don't actually know what they said." If that's you, then literally just ask them to restate the question and ask clarifying questions and be like, "Okay, so what I'm hearing is, you're asking me about the financial projections for the next 5 years. Can you clarify, are you referring to just the US or global, for example?" And so not only is that going to, again, buy you a little bit more time to actually think about what you want to say, but two, it's going to increase your overall understanding of their thought process. And three, it's going to demonstrate to them that you are a thoughtful person. Because from their perspective, they're thinking, "Oh, wow, like he's really thinking about it. Like he's asking me these follow-up questions to try to get more detail. This guy or this girl, they must actually be thinking hard about my question." And so it actually paints you in a good light, even though you might feel like, "Oh, wait, I don't want to ask follow-up questions. I just want to answer immediately and have the right answer." But no, the truth is, asking follow-up questions is not going to reflect negatively on you in 99% of cases. It's actually going to make you look better. And so that's why, to take a management consulting example, in the interview process to get into top management consulting firms like McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, during the case interview, which is a very specific part of the process, it's very important for candidates to ask clarifying questions when they're posed a case problem. And the reason is not just because you get more information when you ask clarifying questions, but it's literally also because you want to demonstrate to the interviewer that you're being thoughtful. And so it's half because you want information, but half because you want to signal that you are someone that thinks deeply about a problem before you start trying to solve it. And the same thing applies here. Now, once you've done that though, the third thing you want to focus on is, let's say worst case scenario, you've used your mental reset phrase, you've restated the question, you've asked some clarifying questions, and at this point you still don't know the right answer to the problem that they're asking. Oh shoot, what do you do now? What you can do, instead of just saying, "I still don't know the answer," is say what you do know. And even better, if that thing that you do know is adjacent or tangential to the question that was actually asked. So let me give you an example. Say, for example, that someone asked me, "Matt, what's the population of the UK?" And I have no idea what the population of the UK is. However, what I do know is that the US has 300 something million people. Maybe it's like 350, 320, something like that, but it's at least 300 million. So what I can say to that person, instead of just saying, "Oh, I don't actually know the population of the UK, I'm sorry," is instead say, "So I don't know off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is that I do know the US population is at least 300 million people. And based on the fact that the UK is definitely smaller than the US, it's probably like at least half the size in terms of population of the UK. So my best guess would be probably 100 to 150 million, but would be good to just double check that. Let me get back to you on it." See, that kind of a response, instead of just saying, "Sorry, I don't know," and it's just stopping there, is so much more helpful and also demonstrates that you're being so much more thoughtful about how you're responding. And so even though you didn't know the actual answer, you're still building a little bit of credibility, or at least not losing any credibility in the way that you're responding, because you're being more thoughtful than the average person. You are proposing that, "Okay, let me get back to you on that." which is a good sign because, again, you're just taking it on yourself, ownership, which is always positive. And you didn't get flustered or just be like, oh, shoot, like, I don't know. And so I kind of already went into the last point here, but the last thing you want to do is you want to propose a path forward. So just like how in that example, I basically said, let me look into this and get back to you. That's a very simple way to demonstrate a little bit more ownership and be valuable, provide some value to that person, even though in the moment you didn't actually know the answer. Because what you're saying is, look, after this, I'm going to spend some time and I'm going to look into this for you. And I'm going to come back to you, hopefully with the right answer. And so even though now I don't know the answer, I've explained to you what I know. I've given you a logical estimate, and I'm also proposing a path forward. And the number one thing that I've noticed among high performers in all the places that I've worked, at Google, at BCG, in investment banking, the number one thing is that all of them never simply stopped at I don't know. They always demonstrated a high degree of ownership, and they were always willing to go an extra step to be helpful and to provide some value to whoever it was that they were working with, whether it was their boss or their peer or even just an intern who was working for them. And so if you can drill this kind of thinking and this mindset into your head and turn it into almost a second nature, then you're just going to improve so quickly and people are going to be like, oh my gosh, so-and-so is just so thoughtful and I would absolutely love to have them on my team. And so again, just to recap, the things you want to avoid which will cause you to lose credibility is rambling because you don't know what else to say and you want to fill the silence, saying stuff that you don't understand, aka BSing your way or trying to BS your way out of a question, which 9 times out of 10 does not work and instead actually hurts you more. And on the other end of the spectrum, over-apologizing or completely shutting down and not even being able to produce a coherent, logical response. Now, what you want to do instead, though, is you want to use mental reset phrases like, that sounds like a really interesting question, or, that reminds me of this other thing, or, thanks for asking that question. I think it's really thoughtful. And you want to restate and ask clarifying questions. You want to say, hey, so, I want to make sure that I really understood your question. Is what you're saying that we should do this? Or is this what you're talking about? And, as a follow-up to that, before I get into my thoughts, how are you thinking about it in this way? Is this specifically the topic that you're focused on? And finally, the third step is you want to say what you do know. And so you say, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, or I'm not 100% certain. However, what I do know is I know that X, Y, and Z. Or I know that this related question, the answer to that is this. And so that maybe can provide you a little bit of directional help on answering this problem, but you want to also propose that path forward. And so you want to say, look, even though I don't know today, I'm happy to look into it. Let me know if you'd like me to dig into this a little bit deeper and I can get back to you. And so if you respond in this way, people are just going to be really impressed. And what you're doing is you're demonstrating a lot of positive qualities about yourself. Like 1, you're not getting flustered even when you're under pressure. 2, you're able to communicate effectively with people who are asking you a question that you don't know the answer to. 3, you're a good problem solver because you can at least map out a estimate, or you can think through an approach to get to the right answer. And 4, you just have a high degree of agency and ownership, and you're not someone who is just willing to say, I don't know, and stop there. But anyways, I really hope that you found this helpful. It's taken me 4+ years of struggling at work to figure this one out. So if you got even an ounce of value from this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what you think. I'll see you guys in the next one.